Welcome to Wyoming Armory, right in the heart and soul of American Vintage Firearms, Cody, Wyoming. Now, I've been promising you that we're going to bring you some really interesting restorations, and we're going to kind of follow them from beginning to end. And so today we're going to start on the first of these restorations. And of course, if you watch the channel, you know that I collect Winchester 1895s. So of course our first restoration is going to be an 1895 Winchester. Now this one's the early first model variety with a flat side. But not only that, it's one of the very first of the flat sides, because this one's serial number 143. And you might think, well, that's a first year gun or first week of production. But there were only 57 of them made in 1895. So this one's a real early 1896 model. Now, from 5 feet away, this one looks pretty good. And you might think, well, geez, don't restore an original flat side Winchester 1895. But on closer inspection, we can see that this one has been refinished in the past. And not only was it refinished, but it wasn't properly polished. So we've got quite a little bit of pitting underneath the old finish. Okay, so let's take a little closer look at this 95. And we can see as we get closer that there's some pretty fair pitting down here on the lever, both on this portion and out here. The receiver here, there's some really light pitting on this side. The other side of the receiver has quite a little bit more. Maybe we can flip it over, and I know it's kind of getting a lot of glare from the lights, but it's not deep, but there's pretty just widespread pitting on this side of the receiver. But the rest of the gun, as I said, is in pretty decent shape. The stock's in real nice shape. Butt plate's in nice shape. The barrel here, we can see we've got an elevator that's kind of from the wrong era, so that's not a big thing to fix. And then the other issue we have is right down here towards the muzzle end of the barrel. We've got a couple of real deep gouges here on the side of the barrel. There's another one on the other side of the barrel, and then one right here on this sight base. And I think they're deep enough. They're going to be really hard to take out without showing, so we're probably going to end up sending this off and getting it laser welded. Okay, we'll start by disassembling this old girl, and of course first thing off we'll take this tang screw out. And of course 95s don't have a removable lower tang, and so here we go. Well, that one slipped right off. That was nice. Set this over here. We'll take the fore end off. Again, we're going to be real careful with this wood because it is in pretty darn nice shape. I think we can freshen it up and keep the gun looking real good. Let's see now. This one has, if you'll notice here, we've got a V-spring up here for the magazine, the follower, and this is in the early style. So the early flat sides would all have these up to the time when they started making the takedowns. Of course, this wouldn't work very good with a takedown where we have to twist the barrel to get it off, so they went to a coil spring that was inside the magazine after that. These are a lot easier to deal with. Let me go get some needle nose pliers. And all we have to do with these is squeeze them down and remove them. Just like that. I much prefer that style to the coil spring that's inside. They're kind of a bugger to deal with sometimes. Okay, now we're gonna get this magazine out of here. Let's see, we need a little smaller tip. And these screw heads are in really nice shape. They're not going to take much, so I'm going to be really careful taking these screws out. I try to keep those slots looking good. Okay. And this one hasn't been out for a while, so there we go. So it just comes out as a unit, just like that. And of course, the carrier in there just flops around because the spring's not in there. We'll set that aside, and the springs for it. Okay, and now we'll go to a little smaller tip here yet. Take this cover screw out, and that's what holds the pin between the bolt and the lever, the top part of the lever. And on the other side we've got a little access hole so we can drive that pin out. And it's a pretty small one, so you can't get much of a punch in there. We'll get it started. And lift this up a little bit so that we can push it all the way through. Now we're going to need a little longer punch to get it out of there. Here we go. There it goes. And now we should, yeah, so that part of the finger lever comes out. Now we've got to punch out a pin here, and this one looks like it's boogered up, like somebody's worked on it pretty hard in the past and it hasn't wanted to come out very good, so that's always kind of a warning sign. And it's not wanting to come out in that direction. Let's see if it works any better in the other direction. There it went. And we're going to have to get it propped up here. Kind of an odd angle. Almost out. There we go. Alright, now we've got another pin back here on the back end of that link. That's just a little too big. And that one's going to be much easier, and push that out by hand. We'll put that right back in so we know where it goes. Okay, now we'll take out this sear spring screw and get that sear spring out of there. There we go. Get the screw out so we don't drop it on the floor. Oh, a lot of times if you can, put your springs right back in your screws right back in your springs so they're easier to keep track of and don't end up on the floor. If you've ever lost a screw or a spring on the floor, it's never a fun thing. Okay, we're going to drift out this pin that holds the sear in. Then we should be able to take out our locking blocks, hammer, and bolt. There we go. And here comes the sear and the locking blocks. And let's get the bolt out of there. And we've pretty much just disassembled an 1895 at that point. Now we can take apart, of course, there's a lot of parts here in the bolt, but really at this point it's unnecessary. Okay, so let's take a quick look at a couple of important markings on this particular rifle. The first is, of course, the serial number 143 that we see here. And on the bottom of the barrel there's a couple of important marks, and if we can get that kind of focused. There's a VP with a circle around it here, and then there's an NS here, and that NS is really important because it stands for nickel steel. And we know that the 95 and 3040 Krag was the first model Winchester that came out from day one with a nickel steel barrel. And why it's important that we confirm this NS under the barrel is because we're kind of used to seeing a marking on the top of the barrel on nickel steel barrels that says nickel steel barrel, especially for smokeless powder, but we don't see it on this particular barrel, and so it's not on all the early nickel steel barrels. So this NS on the bottom of the barrel does confirm what we suspected in the first place, is that this is an early nickel steel barrel. So now we've got this 1895 all polished up and ready to refinish. But now I'm in a quandary. You see, I have to decide what kind of finish I use on this receiver. You see, there are only 5 color case hardened 1895s in the factory record, and this isn't one of them. But case color hardening is what we do, and this would be such a gorgeous rifle with our case colors. I mean, we're the best in the business. Oh, fantastic. Look at that. Very cool. That turned out beautiful. Now I know there's some of you who are going to see that 1895 receiver come out of the quench and go, whoa, those colors are way too bright. Those don't look like original Winchester case colors. Well, let me tell you, there's a lot of misconceptions out there about that. Now, most of what we see today, if they've got any case colors at all, they've faded over the last century or century and a half, and maybe have some blues and grays. But one of the things we've been doing lately is spending a lot of time over at the Cody Firearms Museum with the Winchester Reference Collection and some really high condition survivors, and talking to the staff over there about case colored Winchesters. We've actually discovered some old recipes, but we'll get into that on another episode. So what we found is that the really high condition originals have those big splashes of colors and the really bright colors. And actually we're working on an episode now where we're going to bring a lot of those really high condition survivors out over at the museum and give you a good look at what these case colors should look like, or as close as we can come to what they look like coming out of the quench in the late early 1900s. So keep an eye out for that episode. Now, because there are so few really truly high condition survivor type case colored Winchesters out there, many people are surprised when they see a survivor type at how bright those colors are. Now here's a Hotchkiss rifle from about the same time frame as this 1895, and you can see just the big splashes of color. Now this picture maybe makes it look a little brighter than it actually is. I think it would look more like the tones on this 95, but you get the idea that these original case colors were big bright splashes. And what happens is when the colors start to fade, those yellows and reds are the first to go, and it just leaves behind these grays and these blues that we see in here. Now we don't see many grays and blues here. We see some kind of grays and then some blue background on this 95, but this thing colored almost 100%, and probably underneath those yellows and reds we would see some of those blues and grays. Now a lot of our competition, that's what they go for. They're going for those blues and grays because so many of their customers believe that that's what they look like. But this is only what they look like after the brighter colors have faded off of the receivers. Now another thing you might notice is these screw heads. Now you notice that they're on both of these. They're pretty dull looking, and that's because they were originally case color hardened, and small parts like this don't take those colors very well, so they just kind of come out kind of a dull color. And they were not blued at this time frame. They weren't blued for many years after this. Okay, so we've just finished rust bluing this 95 barrel, and it turned out beautifully. We just recently developed a good working relationship with Mark Lee, and we're using his products now for our rust bluing. This one we used the Mark Lee Express Blue, and it just turned out beautifully. So it's time to get this in the barrel vise and get that gorgeous case colored receiver screwed onto it. There we go. Okay, we'll get her tightened up good. And then of course here's that receiver we're awful proud of. And we've got a little grease on the threads just to keep them from galling as we tighten it up. And of course this is the original barrel, so we would expect that it's going to index up just right and head space properly, because it was before we took it apart. Now before we tighten up this receiver, we're going to slide the bolt in, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it gives this receiver a little more rigidity when we're trying to tighten up with this action wrench. And the second is, we'll know when we're lined up with that extractor and the extractor notch or cut in the back of the barrel. And of course we won't slide it all the way up against the barrel, but once we get it in place, then we can slide this bolt forward and see if that extractor's going to get in that slot in the right place. Now sometimes it takes a lot of torque on these to get them there. That looks like things are lined up pretty good, but not quite. We'll pull this bolt back a little bit and give it another shot. There we go. There, perfect. That bolt's right in place. Okay, now just for a quick double check, we've got a straight edge here in this rear sight dovetail, a straight edge on the top of the receiver, and we actually did have to tweak it just a little bit further over, but this is how we can just look straight down, and we line those two straight edges up. We know we're square right down the barrel. Okay, so the last step in the process was the wood. We had a decision to make. We could either use the original wood that was still on it and in pretty good shape, or we could go out and buy some fancy wood like this 86 stock here that we're working on. And we tried to go ahead and just see if we could make this original stock look good. And so we've got some stain on this, and then several coats of hand rub finish, and really turned out nice. So we may in the future restock it with something really fancy, but for the time being, very happy with the way this turned out. Now, I'm going to give you a tip here on wood finish, and we've gone strictly to using this Timberlux product. Brian Board over at Timberlux is a world-class checker and stock finisher, and he's developed this stuff based on the original recipes from original manufacturers in the late 19th century. So he's got a finish and a walnut stain, and we've just been thrilled with this stuff. So if you're looking for a stain and a finish that really replicate the original finishes, this Timberlux is great stuff. They've got a website, you can check them out there. And we use the same stuff on this really high grade 1886 stock as well. Okay, now it's time to put this old 95 back together again. Before we do, I want to go over just what kind of finishes are on all the parts. Now, as I mentioned, this one wasn't originally a case colored receiver, and we've kind of made a fantasy gun out of it, but everything else we've tried to stay as close to original as absolutely possible. So while we've got this color case hardened receiver, we've got the correct rust blued barrel and magazine. Now, and yes, the few color case hardened 95s that were made had blued magazine and levers. Now, I think because of the fact that this magazine, the metal here is so thin, and again on this lever here, that if they had tried to color case them, they'd had all sorts of problems with warpage. Now, they did make one prototype with a color case hardened lever, and it's absolutely beautiful. Actually, it's sitting in my collection, but it was the only one. It's an unserialized prototype that they tried it on, and then that was it. Okay, so then after that we've got a charcoal blued bolt, and the only niter blued part on these early 1895s is the extractor. And I don't think it's actually niter blue, more of a fire blue, because I think that's just the tempering color on that spring that is the extractor. And of course then the link on the early 95s was color case hardened, and the hammer color case hardened as well. And this one, the locking block on a 95 is actually blued. Now most of the Winchester models, the locking blocks are left in the white, but on the 95 they're blued. Okay, let's see if we can't get this thing to go back together. Okay, so we're pretty much there. Now we have one last thing we want to do before we put the wood on, and that's put a protecting coat over this color case. Now the factories did this, you know, they used a similar product to what they used on their wood stocks to coat the color case hardened surfaces. And what it did, it brings out the beauty of the color case, and it protects it really well. And we see on original guns over and over again where this protectant sealant is still there. The case colors are still present, and where it's worn off, the colors are gone. So we talked a little bit about, we've gone to this Timberlux stain, or not stain but finish for our wood, and it works really, really well on the case hardened parts as well. And I just put it on just like on wood. I just hand rub it in there and just see how it brings the colors out almost immediately. And it stays that kind of shine on it. Just really an excellent product to protect your color case hardened and make it look a whole lot better. Isn't that beautiful? Just makes a heck of a difference. Now it's been a long road from what started out as a badly pitted and poorly blued over 1895 to this beauty. Well, Tony, our stock guy, did a marvelous job of saving this old original stock. Of course, he had a helping hand from the Timberlux. Both the stock and the case colored parts have this Timberlux on them. Just really brings out the beauty and protects them as well. Of course, after looking at this, I may have to go get a set of 3X type feather crotch wood to put on this thing. That would really set things off. But we got this one back together and just in time to take it down to the Antique Arms Show down in Las Vegas and show it off. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, maybe learned a little something. Until next time, happy trails from Wyoming Armory in Cody, Wyoming.